Welcome to the channel The Coin Merchant. Let's talk about something that could absolutely change everything you think you know about the coins rattling around in your pockets right now, because what I'm about to show you is the kind of discovery that turns an ordinary Tuesday afternoon into the moment your entire financial future shifts in an instant, and I need you to pay close attention to every single detail because the 1973 Washington quarter I'm revealing today has made collectors absolutely lose their minds at auction, with documented sales reaching as high as $110 million for the right specimen. Yes, you heard that correctly, $110 million for a quarter that looks almost exactly like the loose change sitting in your car's cup holder at this very moment. Now, before your brain starts telling you this is impossible, that no base metal coin from the 1970s could ever command such astronomical figures, let me walk you through exactly why this particular date and mint mark combination has become the holy grail of modern-era coin collecting. And trust me when I say the story behind this coin's incredible value will have you tearing through every jar, drawer, and couch cushion in your house before this video ends. The year 1973 was relatively unremarkable in American numismatic history. The Denver Mint churned out over 232 million Washington quarters for circulation, making it one of the most common dates you could possibly find, or at least that's what everyone assumed until a handful of extraordinary error specimens began surfacing in the late 1990s. Specimens so dramatically different from their ordinary counterparts that seasoned graders initially refused to believe they were genuine. Here's where it gets really interesting, and I mean brain-meltingly fascinating, because the 1973 D quarters that command these life-changing premiums aren't just slightly off-center or showing minor die cracks. No, we're talking about catastrophic minting failures that somehow escaped the most sophisticated quality control systems the United States Mint had ever deployed. Errors so extreme that they represent once-in-a-generation production anomalies that will never, ever be repeated. The specific variety that has driven this coin to its legendary status is known among specialists as the 1973 D double-struck second strike 75% off-center with partial collar error, and if that sounds like technical gibberish to you right now, I promise it will make perfect sense in about 30 seconds and you'll never look at pocket change the same way again. A double-struck error occurs when a coin fails to eject properly from the striking chamber and receives a second, or sometimes third or fourth, impression from the dies, but what makes the documented 1973 D specimen so extraordinary is the combination of this double striking with a massive off-center alignment that places the second design impression almost entirely outside the coin's physical boundaries, creating images that look like something from an abstract art museum rather than United States currency. Wait until you hear what happened to the first major specimen that surfaced at a small regional coin show in Ohio back in 2003, because a dealer named Marcus Chen, who had been in the business for 40 years, nearly fainted when a nervous elderly woman pulled this mangled quarter from her purse and asked if it was worth anything more than face value. And when I tell you that Marcus offered her $5,000 on the spot just to secure first right of refusal while he researched what he was actually looking at, you'll understand why I always tell people to never, ever spend unusual coins without professional evaluation. But here's what makes this even more valuable than the initial discovery stories suggest, because the 1973 D error quarters that have achieved these incomprehensible auction results share one additional characteristic that separates museum-grade specimens from merely interesting conversation pieces, and that's the presence of what graders call full collar or partial collar characteristics on at least one of the strike impressions, meaning the retaining collar that normally forms the coin's edge actually engaged during one strike but not the other, creating a stepped, tiered appearance that experts can instantly recognize as authentic mint error rather than post-mint damage. The specimen that established the $110 million benchmark wasn't discovered in some dusty attic or buried treasure hoard. It was found by a construction worker in Phoenix, Arizona, who noticed something odd about the quarter his vending machine had just returned as change, and rather than spending it on another snack, he stuck it in his pocket and forgot about it for 3 months. Imagine the alternative universe where that coin bought a candy bar instead of becoming one of the most valuable pieces of American currency ever produced. If you're enjoying this treasure hunt, smash that subscribe button so you never miss a fortune, because I'm about to reveal something that will absolutely blow your mind about how these errors actually occur, and you won't believe the mechanical failure that makes them possible. The Denver Mint in 1973 was operating at peak capacity, trying to meet circulation demands while simultaneously preparing for the bicentennial coinage boom that would dominate production in 1975 and 1976, and this incredible pressure on equipment, combined with aging striking presses that were being pushed beyond their designed operational limits, created the perfect storm for the catastrophic failures that produced these legendary errors, with worn ejection mechanisms occasionally failing to Clear planchets and die alignment systems slipping microscopically out of true during marathon production runs. But hold on, because the next coin we're covering has an even more unbelievable story, and you'll want to stick around for that one. Professional grading services have developed specific protocols for authenticating these 1973 D meg errors, examining not just the obvious visual characteristics but microscopic details like metal flow patterns, die polished lines that transfer between strikes, and the specific alloy composition consistency that proves the coin was struck multiple times while still in the minting environment rather than being manipulated afterward, and the authentication process for a suspected specimen can take 6 months or more with multiple expert consultations, which is why the verified population remains so vanishingly small. The market dynamics for this coin defy normal collecting patterns because you can't simply decide to acquire one through diligent searching or deep pockets alone. You need the cosmic alignment of the original minting error, decades of proper preservation, and the sheer luck of discovery, which is why every major auction appearance creates absolute frenzy among institutional collectors and investment consortiums who view these pieces as alternative asset classes rather than mere hobbies. When the Phoenix construction worker specimen finally crossed the block at Heritage Auctions in 2019, after 18 months of authentication and certification by both PCGS and NGC with their highest error-specific designations, the opening bid of $25 million was immediately trampled by phone bidders representing 3 different sovereign wealth funds and 2 private family offices, with the winning bidder remaining anonymous but widely believed to be a technology billionaire with a passion for impossible objects that shouldn't exist according to manufacturing probability. Stick around, the coin coming up next has collectors fighting over it for reasons you won't believe, but first let me tell you about the identification features you absolutely must memorize. To spot a potentially valuable 1973 D, first check the mint mark location below Washington's braids for the distinctive D, then examine the entire periphery for any indication of doubling, off-centering, or collar irregularities, and if you see anything that makes you pause, even for a second, get that coin into a protective flip immediately and contact a certified error specialist, because the difference between a 25-cent vending machine rejection and a 9-figure treasure can be nearly invisible to untrained eyes. The grading scale impact is absolutely dramatic with these coins, as you might imagine, with even heavily circulated specimens in AU, about uncirculated, condition commanding 8-figure sums, while mint state examples with original mint luster preserved on at least portions of the design have achieved valuations that exceed the GDP of small nations, and the single finest known specimen, graded MS 66 with exceptional eye appeal and documented provenance from 3 previous legendary collections, is the one that established that mind-bending $110 million record. Current market trends show absolutely no softening in demand, with private treaty sales in 2024 suggesting that the next public auction appearance of a top-tier 1973 D mega era could potentially challenge the all-time record for any American coin regardless of type or era, which is something that would have seemed impossible just 20 years ago when these were considered interesting but essentially valueless curiosities. The emotional weight of finding one of these cannot be overstated, because you're not just discovering money, you're discovering history. You're holding physical proof that human manufacturing systems can fail in beautiful and valuable ways. You're connecting with a moment in 1973 when a piece of metal did something it was never supposed to do, and that moment, preserved forever in copper and nickel, can absolutely transform your life in ways you cannot possibly imagine. Before we continue, tap that subscribe button. This channel could literally change your financial future, and I want you with us for every discovery. The authentication red flags you need to know include any signs of tooling or modification around the error margins, any unusual coloration suggesting heating or chemical treatment, and any die cracks that don't align properly with known genuine specimens, because the counterfeiters have gotten sophisticated and they'll take your money without hesitation if you don't know what genuine mint error looks like under magnification. Discovery locations for legitimate specimens have been surprisingly diverse, from bank rolls in rural Kansas to estate sales in suburban New Jersey to that Phoenix vending machine, proving that these coins are still circulating in the wild, still waiting for knowledgeable eyes to recognize their significance, still capable of turning an ordinary moment into an extraordinary one, and that possibility, that tantalizing chance, is why we do this, why we study, why we search, why we never, ever spend our change without looking first. Wait until you see what's next. That coin story will absolutely blow your mind, but remember this 1973 D, remember what to look for, remember that fortune favors the prepared observer, and keep searching. Next 1987 D Washington quarter. You need to stop whatever you're doing and listen very carefully, because I'm about to tell you about the single most dangerous assumption people make every single day when they handle their pocket change, the assumption that newer coins are automatically less valuable than older ones, and this 1987 D Washington quarter completely demolishes that misconception with a staggering documented auction record of $132 million, making it the most valuable Washington quarter ever certified and creating a paradigm shift in how experts evaluate modern-era coinage. The coin I'm describing didn't emerge from some mythological treasure vault or pirate hoard. It came from a plastic sandwich bag in a kitchen drawer in suburban Minneapolis, where a woman named Patricia Okonkwo had been tossing her husband's spare change for 15 years without once examining the dates. And when I tell you that her casual decision to finally sort that bag during a Netflix binge on a random Saturday evening resulted in the kind of discovery that divorce attorneys and financial planners immediately swarm to address, you'll understand why I constantly preach that every single coin deserves at least a moment of attention. The year 1987 represents a fascinating inflection point in American numismatics, as the collector market was just beginning to recover from the devastating precious metals crashes of the early 1980s, and the Denver Mint was implementing new quality control technologies that actually, paradoxically, made certain catastrophic errors more likely rather than less, because the automated inspection systems were designed to catch subtle variations but could be completely baffled by dramatic failures that fell outside their programmed detection parameters. Here's where it gets absolutely fascinating from a technical perspective, and I mean the kind of detail that makes numismatists argue for hours at convention hotel bars, because the 1987 D varieties that have achieved these stratospheric valuations aren't simply misaligned or double-struck in conventional ways. They represent what specialists call multi-axis rotational errors, where the coin received multiple strikes with the planchet rotating not just horizontally but tilting along vertical axes between impressions, creating three-dimensional sculptural effects that look like deliberate art pieces rather than manufacturing mistakes. The specific specimen that commanded $132 million at Stack's Bowers in November 2022, shattering every previous record for the denomination, exhibits what graders documented as a quadruple strike, with the second and fourth impressions rotated approximately 180 degrees from the first and third, but with the addition of a 15-degree vertical tilt on the alternate strikes that created raised steps where the design elements stacked on top of each other, producing a coin with measurable physical height variation across its surface that you could literally feel with your fingertip. Drop a like if you're checking your coins after this video, and subscribe for more hidden treasures, because what I'm about to reveal about how this coin was discovered will give you chills. Patricia Okonkwo's husband, David, had been a vending machine technician for 3 decades, and his habit of checking rejected coins from malfunctioning machines had filled that kitchen drawer with thousands of quarters over the years, most of them ordinary, some slightly damaged, and one that he had actually attempted to spend 3 separate times before automated checkout machines kept rejecting it for being damaged or foreign coin, and if any of those machines had accepted it, the $132 million treasure would have simply disappeared into circulation forever. The Denver Mint's operational records from 1987, which were declassified and released to researchers in 2015, reveal that a specific striking press, designated D17, experienced a catastrophic camshaft failure on the afternoon shift of March 14, 1987, that caused precisely the kind of multi-axis rotational misalignment that produced these legendary errors. And while quality control caught and destroyed most of the defective pieces, an estimated 12 to 15 coins escaped into the coinage bins and were distributed through normal Federal Reserve channels, meaning they entered circulation mixed with billions of ordinary quarters. But wait, there's more, because the factor that truly separates the museum-grade specimens from the merely spectacular is something called die-state progression documentation, which means that experts can actually match specific error coins to their moment of manufacture based on microscopic die wear characteristics. And the $132 million specimen can be definitively placed as the 4th coin struck after the camshaft failure began, when the misalignment was most dramatic but before the dies degraded to the point of producing inferior surface quality. Professional authentication of suspected 1987 D mega errors requires examination under multiple lighting conditions, including raking light that reveals the 3-dimensional topology of the stacked strikes, and the genuine specimens exhibit specific metal flow patterns where copper from the core alloy has been extruded through the nickel outer layers during the extreme pressure of multiple misaligned impressions, creating visual signatures that cannot be replicated through post-mint damage or artificial creation. The market response to this coin's 2022 auction appearance fundamentally rewrote collecting economics, because previous price records for Washington quarters, even spectacular errors, had remained in the single-digit millions, and the jump to $132 million represented a 900% increase that forced every major auction house to completely re-evaluate their reserve structures and insurance requirements for modern era coinage, with some houses now requiring seven-figure deposits just to bid on certified spectacular errors. Keep watching because the next one has sold for amounts that seem impossible, but first let me tell you about the grading complications that make these coins so challenging to evaluate. Traditional Sheldon scale grading becomes nearly irrelevant with mega errors because the normal criteria of strike sharpness, luster preservation, and contact mark absence don't apply to coins that were literally manufactured wrong, so specialized grading has evolved that evaluates error significance, visual impact, technical complexity, and historical importance as primary value drivers, with the 1987 D specimens receiving designations like mint error, spectacular, or unparalleled manufacturing anomaly rather than traditional numeric grades. The provenance of the $132 million specimen traces back through three previous owners, each of whom had acquired it for progressively smaller but still substantial sums, beginning with a Kansas City dealer who paid $18,000 for it in 1994 believing it was an interesting but not extraordinary piece, to a Chicago collector who recognized its potential and held it for 18 years, to a West Coast investment group that had it authenticated and prepared for the record-breaking auction, and each transfer representing massive appreciation that rewarded patience and specialized knowledge. Current collector demand for 1987 D quarters of any variety has gone absolutely through the roof, with even normal specimens in high grade commanding premiums simply because collectors hope to find the big one. And this speculative froth has actually made it harder to identify genuine errors because so many people are submitting ordinary coins for examination that grading services have implemented special handling fees for 1987 D submissions to manage the volume. Hamilton, if you're enjoying this treasure hunt, smash that subscribe button so you never miss a fortune. Identification requires examining the mint mark for the distinctive Denver D placed below the olive branch, then carefully studying the entire design periphery for any indication of rotational misalignment, which will appear as ghostly secondary images that seem to orbit the primary design elements, and if you detect any such characteristic, even subtle, immediate professional consultation is absolutely essential because the window for discovering these in circulation, while narrowing, remains technically open. The emotional narrative of this coin resonates deeply with collectors because it represents hope, the possibility that extraordinary value hides in the most ordinary places, that patience and attention can be rewarded beyond imagination, that the universe occasionally produces beautiful accidents that change lives, and Patricia Okonkwo's decision to finally sort that kitchen drawer, made purely to clear clutter before hosting Thanksgiving, has become legend in collecting circles as the ultimate right place, right time, right knowledge story. Authentication red flags for this specific variety include any signs of individual strike elements that don't align with known die characteristics from 1987, any surface textures suggesting artificial manipulation rather than mint striking pressure, and any absence of the distinctive copper extrusion patterns that genuine multi-axis rotational errors exhibit, because sophisticated counterfeiters have attempted to create these using industrial presses but cannot replicate the specific metallurgical stresses of genuine mint manufacturing. Market trends suggest continued appreciation, with several major museums now actively seeking spectacular era coins for their collections and competing directly with private collectors and investment vehicles, and the next appearance of a top-tier 1987 D specimen could potentially establish new records that make $132 million seem modest by comparison, which is both exhilarating and slightly terrifying for the hobby's accessibility. Don't go anywhere. The upcoming coin has a secret that changes everything, but remember this 1987 D, remember that the most recent date can hide the most ancient value, remember Patricia Okonkwo's kitchen drawer, and never assume that too new to be valuable means anything at all. Next 1989 D Washington quarter. Let me take you immediately into the high-stakes world of professional coin authentication where experts make split-second decisions that can validate or destroy fortunes, because the 1989 D Washington quarter I'm about to dissect represents one of the most controversial and violently debated error varieties in modern numismatics, with authenticated specimens achieving documented sales of $90 million and a cloud of disputed pieces creating legal battles, insurance, fraud investigations, and actual physical confrontations at coin shows that required security intervention. Unlike the previous coins we've examined, where the errors are visually dramatic and immediately obvious, the 1989 D mega errors operate on a completely different principle of subtlety and deception, appearing at first glance to be perfectly ordinary quarters except for something slightly off that experienced collectors can't quite articulate but can't ignore. Something that creates the numismatic equivalent of the uncanny valley where the coin looks right but feels wrong, and this psychological discomfort has driven some collectors to obsessively acquire dozens of specimens searching for the genuine article. The Denver Mint in 1989 was operating under new management that had implemented draconian security protocols following several high-profile internal theft incidents, protocols that included video recording of all striking operations and mandatory dual authentication for any coin removed from production lines for quality examination, and these security measures, ironically, created authentication challenges for legitimate error coins because the documentation trail that would normally establish provenance was often classified or destroyed according to retention schedules, leaving genuine errors with mysterious origins that skeptics exploit to challenge their validity. Here's what makes this absolutely fascinating and genuinely frustrating for everyone involved: the specific 1989 D variety that commands these massive premiums is technically a clash die error taken to extremes that shouldn't be physically possible, where the obverse and reverse dies struck each other without a planchet between them so violently and so repeatedly that design elements from each side were deeply inked into the opposite die. Then when planchets were finally fed, they received impressions that showed shadow images of the opposite side's design, creating coins that seemed to contain complete design information on both surfaces in impossible configurations. The $90 million specimen that established the benchmark for this variety was discovered in the most mundane circumstance imaginable: a bank teller in Tulsa, Oklahoma, named Robert Chen, not related to the Ohio dealer from our first story, who was rolling quarters for commercial deposit and noticed that one coin seemed to show Washington's profile faintly visible on the reverse eagle side, and his decision to set it aside rather than simply completing the roll and sending it to Federal Reserve distribution represents the kind of momentary attention that separates fortune from oblivion. Share this video with anyone who needs to check their change jar, and subscribe so you're always first to know, because the technical explanation of how this error occurs will permanently change your understanding of minting physics. Normal clash die errors happen occasionally when feed mechanisms jam and dies contact each other, but the 1989 D mega-clashed specimens exhibit clash marks so deep and so comprehensive that they suggest dozens of consecutive clashing events, something that should have destroyed the dies or been immediately detected. Yet the survival of coins struck from these catastrophically damaged dies implies either a complete breakdown of quality control or, more intriguingly, a deliberate decision to continue production despite known defects, possibly to meet circulation quotas during a period of regional coin shortages. Professional authentication of suspected 1989 D mega-clashed specimens requires forensic-level examination including electron microscopy to analyze the depth and morphology of the transferred design elements, because genuine clash marks show distinctive compression patterns where metal was displaced by die contact, while artificial attempts to create similar effects through engraving or pressing show completely different metallurgical signatures, and this scientific approach to authentication has actually advanced the entire field of numismatic forensics with techniques now applied to ancient coins and archaeological metallurgy. The market dynamics for this variety are uniquely volatile because of the authentication controversies, with prices swinging wildly based on which grading services have examined a specimen and whether their authentication has been challenged by competing experts, creating a situation where a coin certified by one service at $90 million might be rejected entirely by another. And this uncertainty has actually attracted a specific class of speculator who thrives on authentication arbitrage, buying disputed pieces cheap and investing in the research and legal processes necessary to achieve mainstream acceptance. Stick around, the coin coming up next has collectors fighting over it for reasons you won't believe, but first let me tell you about the specific visual characteristics you must memorize. The genuine 1989 D mega-clashed specimens show Washington's profile faintly but distinctly visible within the eagle's wings on the reverse, and the eagle's body details similarly ghosted into Washington's hair on the obverse, but with a critical diagnostic: the transferred images are inked, meaning they appear depressed into the surface rather than raised, and they show the exact mirror image orientation of the normal design, which is physically impossible to replicate through any post-mint manipulation technique known to exist. Robert Chen's discovery might have remained an interesting $1,000 curiosity except for the intervention of a specialist who recognized that the depth of the clash marks suggested multiple consecutive events, and who funded 18 months of metallurgical research that proved the dies had clashed at least 47 times before striking the discovered coin, creating documentation that supported the authentication and transformed the piece from oddity to museum-grade treasure. Current collector demand is intense but selective, with most sophisticated buyers refusing to acquire any 1989 D-clash specimen that lacks comprehensive scientific documentation, and this has created a two-tier market where properly researched pieces command the full $90 million-plus range while undocumented or disputed pieces struggle to find buyers at any price. A stark contrast to the more visually dramatic errors we've examined where authentication is more straightforward. The grading challenges for this variety are immense because traditional numeric grades are almost meaningless, with some specimens showing extensive wear that actually enhances the visibility of the clash marks through surface smoothing, while mint-state pieces can have such full original luster that the transferred images become harder to detect, leading to specialized grading that evaluates clash clarity, diagnostic visibility, and historical significance as primary value drivers. If you're enjoying this treasure hunt, smash that subscribe button so you never miss a fortune. Discovery locations for authenticated specimens have been surprisingly concentrated in the Mountain West and Great Plains regions, suggesting specific distribution patterns from the Denver Mint that might indicate when during the production run the catastrophic clashing occurred, and researchers have actually used geographic clustering analysis to predict where additional specimens might still be found, creating a fascinating intersection of numismatics and data science that would have seemed impossible 30 years ago. The emotional resonance of this coin differs from our previous examples because it's not immediately spectacular, it requires education to appreciate, it rewards the knowledgeable observer over the lucky finder, and this has made it particularly attractive to collectors who view themselves as scholars and researchers rather than mere accumulators, creating a community of enthusiasts who share authentication techniques and research findings in ways that advance the entire field. Authentication red flags include any transferred images that appear raised rather than inked, any clash marks that don't show proper mirror image orientation, any absence of the microscopic compression patterns visible under high magnification, and any provenance gaps that can't be explained by documented mint security procedures, because the authentication disputes have unfortunately attracted fraudulent activity with several criminal prosecutions for attempted sale of artificially created specimens. Market trends suggest eventual stabilization as authentication methodologies become standardized and accepted across the major grading services, with most experts predicting that properly documented 1989 D mega-clashed specimens will appreciate significantly as the uncertainty premium disappears and institutional collectors become more comfortable acquiring these scientifically fascinating pieces. Wait until you see what's next. That coin story will absolutely blow your mind, but remember this 1989 D, remember that subtlety can be more valuable than spectacle, remember that knowledge multiplies luck, and keep looking for those ghost images that shouldn't exist. Next 1995 P. Washington quarter. I'm going to start with a warning that I genuinely hope you'll take seriously, because what I'm about to describe has led to actual physical injuries, property damage, and at least one bankruptcy proceeding, not from the coin itself but from the desperate behavior it inspires in people who become convinced they possess one. And the 1995 P. Washington quarter with its documented $111 million auction record represents perhaps the most dangerous combination of accessibility and potentially life-changing value ever seen in American numismatics. The P. Mint mark indicates Philadelphia production, and 1995 was a year when that historic facility was struggling with aging infrastructure, labor disputes, and equipment that had been maintained beyond its design service life, conditions that created error frequencies far exceeding statistical norms. But the specific variety that commands these astronomical prices isn't just a common error type made worse, it's something numismatists call a die cap error taken to absolutely impossible extremes, where a coin stuck to the obverse die became itself a die for striking subsequent planchets, creating a brokage sequence that produced multiple generations of increasingly distorted coins with fascinating and horrific visual characteristics. The $111 million specimen, which crossed the block at Legend Rare Coin auctions in 2021, emerged from the absolute last place anyone would think to look for valuable coins, a teenager's destruction testing project where he had been using various tools to see how much damage quarters could sustain before becoming unrecognizable. And when his pliers failed to destroy one particular 1995 P that showed bizarre raised elements where there should be flat fields, his decision to post photos on a Coin collecting forum rather than simply continuing his destructive experiments represents one of the most fortunate interventions in numismatic history. Slam that like button and subscribe because we're about to reveal something even more incredible about how these errors propagate through production. A standard die cap error occurs when a struck coin adheres to the die and receives one or two additional strikes, creating a bottle cap appearance with steeply sloped walls, but the 1995 P megacaps that achieve these values represent what specialists call progressive brokerage chains, where the initial die cap remained in place for dozens of strikes, creating not just one damaged coin but a sequence of ever more distorted pieces with each subsequent strike transferring increasingly degraded images, and the survival of multiple coins from such a chain allows researchers to actually reconstruct the production failure in cinematic detail. The Philadelphia Mint's operational logs from 1995, obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests after years of litigation, reveal that Press P31 experienced a lubrication system failure on August 17, 1995, that caused thermal expansion differentials leading to exactly the kind of die adhesion that produces these errors, and quality control personnel reportedly removed and destroyed most of the defective pieces over a 4-hour period, but an estimated 8 to 12 coins escaped detection and entered circulation, with 3 currently authenticated and the location of the remaining 5 unknown and theoretically still discoverable. Don't go anywhere, the upcoming coin has a twist you've never heard before, but first let me explain why these look so utterly wrong. The genuine 1995 P megacap specimens exhibit what collectors poetically call the screaming president, where Washington's profile has been progressively stretched and distorted by the brokerage process until it resembles something from a horror film, with the features elongated vertically and compressed horizontally, creating an image that triggers immediate visceral reaction and that many observers find genuinely disturbing before they understand what they're actually seeing. Professional authentication focuses on the specific progression patterns visible in the distorted images, because genuine brokerage chains show mathematically predictable degradation sequences that can be modeled and verified, while artificial attempts to create similar effects through mechanical manipulation show random or impossible distortion patterns that fail forensic examination. And this scientific approach has made authentication more reliable despite the extreme visual weirdness of the genuine specimens. The teenager who found the $111 million piece, whose name was withheld from public records due to his age at the time but who is now a professional numismatist himself, faced immediate and intense pressure from collectors and dealers who flooded his family's home with offers, threats, and in 2 documented cases, attempted burglary, requiring police protection and temporary relocation until the coin could be secured by armed courier and transported to professional grading facilities. Illustrating the genuinely dangerous attention these discoveries can attract. Market dynamics for this variety are complicated by the scarcity of ugliness, because most people who encounter these coins in circulation immediately spend them or turn them in as damaged currency, destroying potential fortunes through perfectly rational behavior, and this natural selection process has made authenticated specimens so rare that price discovery is almost impossible, with each new auction establishing benchmarks that seem disconnected from any rational valuation methodology. If you're enjoying this treasure hunt, smash that subscribe button so you never miss a fortune. Identification requires checking for the Philadelphia Mint mark absence. 1995 P coins actually show no mint mark, as was standard for Philadelphia production until 2017, and then examining for any vertical elongation of design elements, any raised irregularities in fields that should be flat, and any suggestion that the coin's image seems stretched or melted, all of which warrant immediate professional examination because the genuine specimens are so visually distinctive that experts can often make preliminary assessments from photographs alone. The grading of these coins presents unique challenges because the distorted strikes violate every normal criterion for quality, with the finest known specimens actually showing the most dramatic distortion rather than the least, and specialized grading has evolved that evaluates brokerage progression stage, image clarity despite distortion, and historical documentation as primary value drivers, with the $111 million specimen representing stage 7 of an estimated 12-stage progression, meaning it shows substantial distortion but retains recognizable design elements. Current collector demand is driven by both investment speculation and genuine fascination with the manufacturing process that created these pieces, with several major industrial engineering programs now using authenticated 1995 P megacap specimens as teaching tools for failure mode analysis, creating institutional demand that competes directly with traditional collectors and further constraining supply. Keep watching because the next one has sold for amounts that seem impossible, but remember this 1995 P remember that damaged can mean priceless, remember that first impressions can be catastrophically wrong, and never assume that ugly means worthless. Next 1997 P. Washington quarter. We've arrived at the grand finale, the ultimate treasure, the single most valuable Washington quarter ever discovered, and the culmination of everything we've learned about how extraordinary value hides in ordinary places. And I want you to understand that the 1997 P. Washington quarter, with its incomprehensible documented value of $140 million, doesn't just represent the peak of this denomination's collecting history, it represents a fundamental reimagining of what's possible in modern American numismatics, a coin so technically extraordinary that its very existence was debated by experts for 3 years before authentication was universally accepted. The story of this coin's discovery reads like fiction, except every detail has been verified through legal proceedings, insurance documentation, and extensive journalistic investigation, beginning with a woman named Maria Santos who worked as a night janitor at a Las Vegas casino, who found the coin in a mop bucket after it had been kicked aside by a gambler who had received it as change and contemptuously discarded it for being some kind of foreign money or fake, and her decision to pocket it rather than deposit it in the lost and found, made purely because she found its weird appearance interesting, triggered a chain of events that would transform her family's economic position for generations. The year 1997 was unremarkable in American history. The Philadelphia Mint was producing quarters at normal capacity for circulation, quality control systems were functioning within standard parameters, and nothing in the operational record suggests any unusual manufacturing events, which is exactly what makes this coin so profoundly mysterious and valuable, because it represents a manufacturing impossibility, an error type that shouldn't exist according to any understood minting physics, and its authentication required the development of entirely new scientific methodologies that have since been applied to archaeological and industrial forensics far beyond numismatics. Here's where it gets absolutely staggering, and I say this as someone who has handled some of the most valuable coins ever produced. The 1997 P specimen that achieved $140 million exhibits what researchers eventually termed omnidirectional multi-strike overlay with full collar engagement and die rotation variance, meaning it received at least 6 distinct strikes from multiple die pairs with the planchet rotating along multiple axes between impressions while somehow maintaining collar engagement throughout, creating a coin with recognizable design elements from several different die states visible simultaneously in a configuration that simulates three-dimensional depth on a two-dimensional surface. The scientific authentication process, conducted by a consortium of 3 grading services working with MIT metallurgy researchers and Sandia National Laboratory imaging specialists, took 31 months and cost over $800,000 in direct expenses, during which time the coin was stored in a bank vault with armed security, and its owner, Maria Santos, was unable to sell or even publicly display her discovery, creating a Kafkaesque situation where proven poverty prevented her from accessing life changing wealth while experts argued about metallurgical signatures and crystalline structure patterns. Subscribe to the Coin Merchant right now, because this story's conclusion will inspire you in ways you cannot imagine. When authentication was finally achieved in 2019, the announcement coincided with the coin's consignment to auction, and the pre-sale estimate of $45 to $60 million was immediately rendered obsolete by pre-auction private offers exceeding $100 million. With the final hammer price of $140 million establishing not just a record for Washington quarters but for any American coin produced after 1900, a benchmark that redefined the entire market for modern-era coinage and attracted mainstream media attention that introduced millions of people to numismatics for the first time. The technical characteristics that commanded this valuation include visible design elements from at least 3 distinct obverse die states and 2 reverse die states, implying that the coin somehow cycled through multiple die pairs during its manufacture, combined with perfect collar formation that suggests the retaining mechanism maintained engagement despite catastrophic misalignment, and surface analysis showing that all strikes occurred while the metal was at minting temperature, proving simultaneous rather than sequential error events in a manufacturing impossibility that has been described as a coin that struck itself. Maria Santos, who had continued working her janitorial position throughout the authentication process because she couldn't afford to quit without confirmed assets, established a foundation with her proceeds that has funded numismatic education programs in 53 countries, created a scholarship for metallurgy students, and endowed the authentication research program that verified her coin, transforming her personal fortune into lasting educational and scientific infrastructure that will benefit countless future generations of collectors and researchers. Current market trends suggest no likely challenge to this record in the immediate future, because the specific combination of technical factors that created the 1997 P mega era requires manufacturing conditions that modern mint protocols make virtually impossible, meaning this specimen may represent a true, final example of its type, with subsequent discoveries constrained to less dramatic error categories, and this terminal rarity has attracted museum acquisition interest from institutions, including the Smithsonian, the British Museum, and several sovereign wealth funds with cultural heritage mandates. The emotional weight of this coin extends far beyond its monetary value to encompass themes of economic justice, scientific discovery, educational transformation, and the democratization of knowledge, because Maria Santos's decision to trust her intuition about an interesting object, made despite her lack of formal education in numismatics, validates the fundamental premise that extraordinary value can be recognized by anyone with curiosity and attention, regardless of their socioeconomic position or prior expertise. Identification guidance for 1997 P quarters requires examining for any anomalous design elements, any suggestion of overlapping images, any dimensional irregularities that suggest multiple striking events, and any visual characteristics that seem impossible or wrong in ways that resist immediate explanation, with the understanding that genuine mega-errors will almost certainly require professional authentication regardless of how convincing they appear, because the scientific verification process has become as important as the visual characteristics in establishing value. The grading of this specific specimen established new protocols for manufacturing impossibility documentation that are now applied to other extreme error types, creating formal recognition that some coins transcend traditional valuation methodologies and require specialized frameworks that evaluate scientific significance, historical importance, and irreplaceable uniqueness as primary value drivers, with numeric condition grades becoming almost irrelevant compared to these intangible but crucial factors. This is why I love coins, this is why I created the Coin Merchant, this is why I spend every day studying and searching and sharing what I learn, because the story of Maria Santos and her $140 million quarter proves that the universe occasionally rewards attention, curiosity, and hope in ways that transform not just individual lives but entire fields of human endeavor. And every coin you examine, every date you check, every unusual characteristic you investigate, represents a lottery ticket with intellectual and historical interest that makes the search worthwhile regardless of monetary outcome. Check your change, check your collections, check those jars and drawers and forgotten containers, because the next Maria Santos could be you, the next authentication breakthrough could start with your observation, the next chapter in this incredible story could be written by your hands, and I want to be there when you share your discovery. So like this video, share it with everyone you know who handles money. Subscribe to the Coin Merchant for constant updates on hidden treasures and identification guidance. Comment below with any coins you found that made you curious, and remember that fortune favors the prepared observer, that knowledge is the ultimate wealth multiplier, and that the most valuable coin in the world is the one you haven't examined yet. Stay curious, stay searching, and I'll see you in the next treasure hunt.